Thank you for staying with us. Just before we get into that conversation, let's remind you of something that started in 1981, which the Lagos state government is finally crescendoing today. We'll bring you more details on that as time goes on. But as you've seen right there, Mr. Dr. Austin Tamjo joins us this morning to have a conversation around FG's policies to revamp the economy, assess governance across states, and to strengthen inter-ethnic relations in the country. He is former Commissioner for Information in Rivers State. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me.
No doubt, a good number of people have been talking about the federal government's policies, and depending on whose side you're on or what side of the divide you find yourself, opinions are as divided. What do you make of those federal government's policies to start with?
Well, you know, the campaigns are over now. The government is in place. The cabinet has been formed. So we can't be talking about promises anymore. This is exactly the phase when campaign promises must now be implemented. The Tinubu campaign had a slogan, renewed hope. So at this point, after the elections have been conducted and the campaigns are over, actual governance begins. And so what Nigerians are expecting at this point in time is how we need to transition from slogans, campaign slogans, to make renewed hope, an actionable governance doctrine. So, for instance, Nigerians will be looking for what renewed hope means in education. On a sector-by-sector basis, what does it mean in education? And I imagine that, renewed hope in education should mean increased access to education, completely rethinking our educational infrastructure to make sure that the president works with state governors to completely rethink, the emphasis on credentialism and certification. How do we make sure we'll bring back, skill acquisition into the debate so that when people leave school, they are not looking to get jobs, but they are looking to create jobs for themselves and create jobs for others. So we want to also see, for instance, what renewed hope means, in the power sector. What it has to mean, as an actionable doctrine has to be to increase access to power supply, uninterrupted power supply, so that the productive base of the economy will have power in order to work and create jobs. What does renewed hope mean in healthcare delivery? What it has to mean, if you really want to change the material circumstances of our people, is to make sure there's improvement in primary healthcare delivery system across the country. The president has to work very closely with the state government because, as you know, in the final analysis, the over 200 million Nigerians that we have are scattered in all the 36 states of the federation. So the president cannot do it alone. He has to work in close synergy with the state governments and the local governments. So what does renewed hope mean in practical, actionable terms? I think that's what Nigerians will be looking out for.
And I'm actually very glad that you started by talking about the need, how crucial it is for the federal government and the states to collaborate, without which we will not at all have the kind of impact that we desire to have. The federal government, for instance, one of the programs that has already been declared is food security, an emergency in the food security sector. And it definitely spoke about areas in which the federal government will purchase or acquire property or landed property from the state to conduct these, programs and all of those things. And then, of course, in that same space, he's talked about palliatives distribution to the states, 5 billion each in cash and in kind and all of those things. But, that collaboration, how strong would you say it has been historically, and what must change now to make it as strong and as effective as it ought to be? Because, we all know what has happened in the palliatives distribution, for instance. Once you hear palliatives, the mind of many goes back to 2020 and the things that happened at the time. And then, but generally, in terms of collaboration, how strongly do you think they have been over the years? particularly in terms of legislation and actual implementation?
Historically, the collaboration hasn't been good. As you know, during the Buhari administration, for instance, there was a great deal of discussion about palliatives, especially during the COVID-19 crisis. And what we found, especially at the level of the states, was very pathetic, very unacceptable. If you want to be blunt about this, frankly, there is hardly any kind of administrative or legislative oversight that happens at the level of the states. I'm afraid that you can't expect politicians to hold themselves to account. You will have to find a way to work with the legislature to make sure that there is legislative oversight. But unfortunately, across the spectrum, we haven't seen that kind of legislative oversight. So the governors are basically left to their devices. And unfortunately, civil society is fragmentary and weak in this country to the point where, civil oversight is not also strong. So what I would suggest, since we are talking about a new dispensation, is for the president to make it very clear, send a strong signal to the state governors that, look, you have direct administrative jurisdiction over the states. And so the policies of the federal government will have to find practical resonance on the ground in your states. And I can't do this without your buy-in. So you have to make sure you drive this process. I think palliatives, should be understood in a much more complex way than simply, distributing bread and beans, in local governments, mainly to party faithfuls. I think that when we are talking about palliatives this time, it should be institutionally guided. In most states, the ministries of social welfare are not very strong. So maybe we have an opportunity now in the final analysis to make sure that we institutionalize the distribution of these palliatives. I would personally prefer that the palliatives are not sent in the form of food, because that's not sustainable. We've seen that repeatedly across history. So what I think is that the palliatives, 5 billion naira, I understand that they are about to send to the states, should be invested in primary healthcare delivery systems, should be invested in education, should be invested in visible, sustainable projects, rather than simply, given a few packets of beans and the noodles to families, which, as well as we've seen, are not sustainable. But what I think I need to emphasize is that the governors must be brought, to take responsibility for the administration of their states. I have been in government, and I can tell you that there is very little oversight that happens at the state level, and I think that has to change. But if it doesn't change, the very best intentions of Mr. President may not find actual manifestations on the ground in the states. And I think sometimes we get it wrong by placing disproportionate amount of attention to the federal government without realizing that the state governors actually have direct administrative responsibility for the people that live in those states. And so the states remain, a very weak link in terms of execution of impactful projects. So now that we have a new set of governors, except those who are returning, and we also have a new president whose administrative doctrine is based on renewed hope. As I said in the beginning, we need to find this renewed hope, completely rethinking our approach to sectoral delivery systems. You mentioned, healthcare delivery. Primary healthcare delivery is the closest. Primary healthcare is the closest, tier of healthcare delivery system to the people. Before you move to the secondary and the tertiary, we need to find a way to make sure that there are impactful policies that can change the material lives of our people. Nigerians are going through a lot, and I think that the expectations are very high. This government cannot afford to drop the ball, and I think there's a commitment to change things on the ground.
Allow me to stay with this states conversation for a bit, and I'll give you a few instances to which you can speak. We once interviewed an ex-governor of your state, Governor Wike, and one of the things that we asked him was, look, how come when the intervention projects of the NDDC are going to happen in oil producing states that the governors are not aware? I mean, isn't there supposed to be some kind of carry along system where you don't go into a state to execute any project without carrying the state government along? And of course, he talked about the fact that that conversation doesn't really happen. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, you just also cited the fact that when things are coming from the federal government to the states, a good number of times the states, rather than take initiative and actually do what is expected, they kind of politicize it. An example is what's on the front page of the Daily Times newspaper this morning, where Adamawa residents are alleging the fraud in rebranding foodstuff with the photographs of the governor and accuse him of vendetta. Of course, the governor hasn't said anything, to that. And that's just two of several examples. In the previous administration, we had a situation where the federal government said, in collaboration with the states, we're going to pull 100 million Nigerians out of poverty. We know whether or not that has happened. So in terms of this collaboration, is it the legal instrument that is missing, the political will that is missing, or the supervision? What exactly is it that is making that collaboration difficult or not happen?
I think the structures of accountability, in this country are simply weak. That's just the fact. Concerning the NDDC collaborating with states, I mean, there is really nothing wrong with that. But as you probably know, the NDDC itself has been over politicized to the point where you would have expected, those who have technical competence, that's an intervention agency, so you would have expected those who have technical competence to head it, to set the developmental agenda for the region and drive the process. But what we've seen, especially in the past 8 years, has been a situation where people are just randomly selected, and put in the board, and then those who are appointed tend to be of different political tendencies to the governors who administer the state. So my hope, frankly, is that this is going to change in this new administration. A board has just been set up. There should be no difficulty. I mean, if development is the single agenda of these agencies and the state governments, there should be no difficulty at all in these parties collaborating to drive development, to the door of the people. So as I said, we need to see how renewed hope works, especially now that we have so many unemployed people in the country. There is talk of some debate about the percentage of those who are unemployed in this country. In 2020, the National Bureau of Statistics, put out the numbers and said over 33% of Nigerians were unemployed. But now, I think 2 weeks ago, we now have new figures coming from the NBS suggesting that they are rebasing the statistical metrics for calculating unemployment, and we now have 4.1 people unemployed in this country.
How do you feel about that?
I think that this is a very dangerous trend. The NBS is a very highly respected, very vital, strategic national institution. You don't fight unemployment by creating statistical debates. What we should be looking at is a situation where we recognize that we have a lot of young people who are unemployed. And the government, the president has made it very clear that he's not looking at statistics so much, he's looking at how to create employment. The president, at least as I understand it, the president appears to have a keen awareness of the kind of unemployment crisis that we face. And he's made that very clear, that he's going to make employment provision a very key target of his administration. The government cannot do it alone. I presume they will work with enterprising Nigerians and the private sector. The finance minister, in his first press briefing, also placed a very important emphasis on job creation. So I think that the folks at the NBS should be very careful, not to create an unnecessary statistical debate about unemployment. The unemployment figures they are presenting are not only ironic, but laughable, because it suggests that Nigeria has far more employed people than France. So these things can, in the final analysis, actually erode the kind of credibility that the NBS has always been known for. So my suggestion would be for those folks at the NBS to be very careful and not take political sycophancy to the NBS or politicize the National Bureau of Statistics, because that's a very strategic national institution. The figures that they put there are supposed to be believable and close as possible to reality. The figures that come from the NBS are used as a basis for policy formulation, not only by government here in the country, but also by investors. So we have to be very careful not to politicize such a very serious public institutions.
Well, Dr. Tamjo, just one moment. Let's go back to 42 years ago, when the conversation around what the Lagos State government at the time called the Metroland project began, but now it seems to have come to a head. Correspondent Darido, who is right there on the field and at the location of where the official commencement of the Lagos Blue Rail Line will kick off from today. Well, Dari, if you can hear me, what's the update? Can you give us a quick background? How far so far? What are we looking forward to today, particularly about this Lagos Rail Mass Transit Program?
I can hear you clearly, and I can tell you that the day is here. Any moment from now, the governor of Lagos State will be here to take this particular ride. You can see the train is set, or the trains are on the track, ready. This is the exact station where the then president, Muhammadu Buhari, was. He launched this particular project in January. And what we're expecting today is that the governor will take this inaugural ride from the Marina station to Mile 2. We don't know how far, we don't know how long that would take us, but it's a 13-kilometer ride. Let me give you a bit of a background, just like you have asked. Downstairs, there's a whole lot of activities, drumming, dancing, a lot of officials waiting for the governor to come. And when he comes, of course, they've spoken a lot about the processes of getting on board this particular train. When you're going to come in as a commercial passenger, there are processes. You get the carry card. You use the carry card. Once you're done with that, you gain access into this particular platform we're at this moment, and you'll be able to take this train. One key part of this entire project is the fact that this train will run on electricity. And there are two questions, especially the key one is about safety. And that's what we're going to talk about quickly right now. If you see, normally most of the trains, especially the one we're having at the moment from Lagos to Ibadan, which is the federal project, runs on the what they call the DMU, but this is a different one. It's going to run on electricity, and the tracks you're seeing at the moment, that is why you have an extra rail. It uses a third rail, and that is where the train will generate its power from when we move. But I need to say this. Clearly, the Lamata boss mentioned that this particular ride and subsequent ride in the coming weeks will be on locomotive, not on this particular, not on electricity just yet. What you are seeing at the moment is the completion of the first phase, which is the 13 kilometers. Once they are done, they said, once they are done with the 27 kilometers, with all the infrastructure, with all the independent grid that will supply this, then the train will be able to run with full capacity, which is expected to convey about 500,000 people daily, and will be able to run on electricity.
Well, you've started us out, Dare, on a very aspirational note. It will run on electricity. And you raised a very vital concern of safety. How about security? Because the sustainability of this project is also something that people should talk about. I mean, if anything happens to the electricity infrastructure, most certainly it's worrisome, don't you think?
The Lagos State government, in some of the information or the communication they've been putting out in the past couple of days, they've mentioned the fact that they would have security in place, ununiformed men, and they would use the Lagos State neighborhood watch men. They will be on ground at every station. Aside that, one key part, the safety part, is that they've cut it off. There's a fence around the facility, which is, of course, you and I know, 700 votes, 750 votes. It's a high voltage, and there's been a lot of advocacy going out there to warn people against crossing the tracks. They said there will be 300 cameras across the facilities, the terminals, the train stations, the tracks, just to make sure that they monitor everything. Then the track, they said there will be 30 cameras on the tracks, just to make sure that they monitor activities, vandals and all sorts. Even with the construction of the facility that we've seen, there's been some obstruction, there's been some destruction in the past, and they're trying to guide against this. It's not only the fact that vandals can create something dangerous for the public, they can also harm themselves going close to this track. It's a different ball game. It's different. It's the first of its kind in Nigeria. Lagos, we haven't seen anything like this before, and that's because of the fact that the rail tracks will be on high voltage, and they've been trying to send out communication to the public just to make sure that they are fully aware of the danger. Although it remains to be seen if all this information or the communication the Lagos State government has been putting out are enough to at least guide the public against all the danger they've been warning against. Ayo.
Well, most certainly something concerning, I mean, particularly given the information that you're also confirming to us now. I'm also very excited about what you mentioned when you talked about the cowrie cards, or is it cowrie coin? I don't know which one it is, particularly because the national rail system, people still have to use cash only to board wherever you go. But now you're saying it is purely electronic. Exactly how is that happening? No cash transactions, just cowrie cards? Help educate us further.
Okay, I'm going to start by explaining how much this would cost. If you're trying to take a full-length ride of this train, say from Marina to Mile 2, it's going to cost you 750 naira. Then the Lagos State, with the palliative in place, they've slashed the price by 50%. So you're paying around 375 naira. So what you will need to do is you obtain a card. You can load the card. It's just like your credit card. You can load it, have money ready in your card. Anytime you are ready to take a ride, you go to the train station. That is your access card. Once you have your card loaded, once you have money on it, you're able to take the ride from any spot, and that is how it's going to work. As we're coming in, we got a lot of the salesperson downstairs trying to sell the card to us, and that's the process. Do you want to buy a card? And they were asking if we're going to buy the card to have access to this. But you and I know that this is a special day. They're expecting the governor to come around, and a lot of people will take a ride with the governor. So I assume that today will be a different day. There will be a lot of access. Many journalists, many officials of the state and invited guests would have that unhindered access. They won't have to get the carry card. But from tomorrow or any other time you're trying to take this ride, this 13-kilometer ride, you would need the carry card, which will grant you access. You won't even get to this point that I'm standing at the moment if you don't have that card, Ayo.
Well, it's very exciting to hear, Dare. I mean, most certainly something every Lagosian should look forward to. As unbelievable as it sounds, it is finally happening 42 years after it was initiated. At what time exactly is this supposed, this commissioning is supposed to happen? We're expecting the governor anytime soon?
The time stated was 9 a.m. We're expecting the governor. Of course, downstairs, we'll be able to show that in our subsequent crossings, a lot of officials are already there waiting for the governor. And once the governor comes, we expect him to come to this particular point. And if you can see the train in the background, that is the train right there. A lot of officials are already also on standby. The process is taking this right before, of course, during the inspection tour, there was a facility launch, and there was eventually the official launch of this project, at least the phase one from Marina to Mile 2. So once the governor comes with all his officials and everyone, we would expect that it will come straight to this particular platform, get on board, and we'll go on that ride. Of course, we'll be bringing you all the updates. I also have my colleague at Mile 2, who is also on standby. Eventually, would also give you all the updates, what's happening there with this particular launch, Ayo.
Thank you so much, Dari. We'll most certainly keep everyone informed about this. It is first of its type in Nigeria, and it has finally happened. Thank you so much, Dari, for a wonderful reporting there. Well, that's Daridu, our correspondent, bringing you live updates about the Lagos Rail Mass Transit happening finally after so many years. Well, Dr. Tam George, that is definitely the kind of thing. You're looking very excited yourself.
Yeah, you know, anytime there is many developments happening that will directly benefit the people, you know, I'm very much in support of it. In fact, as I was looking at his presentation on the screen, I was just reminiscing, you know, on my experience with rail transport system in Barcelona in 2011. You know, we need this kind of, you know, mass transit system that can move the largest amount of people at a time from one location to the other. It will create economic opportunities. It will make people, you know, find it easier to move within the city. And sometimes those who are, you know, transporting farm produce, you know, from one location to the other will get to the markets faster. So this kind of, you know, infrastructural development that can have direct impact on commerce and general commercial mobility is very exciting indeed, and we want to see more of this happening across the country.
You know, this rail line that we're talking about is going to traverse quite a number of local governments, no doubt. And it brings to mind one of the stories on the front pages of one of the papers this morning, where CSOs and lawyers are asking the federal government to disburse resources directly to the local government authorities. You know, it's on the front page of this Nigerian newspaper this morning. And they berated the governors for all of that. Now, of course, you are not unaware that a good number of state governors have always opposed this. Speak to us about your experience, particularly when you were in government. How easy or not it is to engage local government authorities, rather activate local government authorities to work on their own by themselves, the way we had it in the First Republic, the Second Republic, and the Third Republic. Why is it difficult?
It's interesting that you ask this question because, you know, ironically, one of the major arguments, you know, for the creation of local governments was the recognition that this is a tier of government, you know, that is closest to the people. And so there were so many agitations for the creation of local governments in order to drive development closer to the doors of the people. But these local governments, especially over the past 10, 15 years or so, have been emasculated. You know, a lot of their funds have been diverted by the state government. This is no secret. I mean, this is happening all over the country. So if they don't have direct funding going to the local governments, and the local governments are then able to, you know, use these resources, you know, in a way that will have direct impact on the people, of course, development is going to fail, and that is what we've seen all across the country. But there are two things here to consider. The first is that there has to be a strong insistence, you know, from the center, from the federal government, to make sure that not only are these monies disbursed directly to the local governments, but that there must be an accounting process to make sure that these monies, when they get to the local governments, are not diverted by the state governors. The president has got to make sure, working with the Accountant General of the Federation and other state institutions at the center, must make sure that these disbursed funds are carefully monitored and that they get to their actual destinations. Now, when they get to the local governments, there has to be a completely separate accounting process to make sure that these funds are actually disbursed in a way that benefit the people. So, unfortunately, what we've seen is that, along the spectrum I just laid out, we have very weak oversight happening, from the center out to the state levels. And when it gets to the states, even when the funds are diverted, we see that very little eventually trickles down to the local governments. And when even the little that gets to the local governments, nobody is actually held accountable for the use of these funds. Do they have development projects? Do they have a development agenda? We don't see these things. So there is a massive dysfunction in the system. And I think that the new administration, the president appears to be very aware of this, and I hope we will see a change. But I can tell you, over the past decade or so, it's been a complete failure of the local government administrations, and the state governors are directly responsible for this failure.
Particularly coming at a time when we saw one governor in the Southwest receiving adulation, so to speak, from local government chairmen, literally bowing to him to do the needful for them. But this is a conversation for another day, and so many other things to raise with you. Dr. Austin Tam George, unfortunately, we are completely out of time. We have to let you go. Dr. Austin Tam George is former commissioner for information in Rivers State. Once again, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.